Okay, it's every day better. I'm Jay Fidell here with Marco Mangelsdorf of Provision Solar, who joins us by Skype audio from Hilo, the state of Hilo. And we're going to call this show, as we always do, Marco and me on energy. Okay, perfect. And we're going to call it Ramping Up, make that ranting up to the briefing. Okay, Marco, thank you for joining us today.
Well, Jay, again, my great pleasure, and it wouldn't be an Aloha Monday talking about energy if it weren't to be with anybody but you.
We got to make a habit of this. I mean, you know, the thing about it is you have to clarify your thinking about it because there's so many things that are either happening or not happening. You know, it's like you got to sweep the deck clean, put everything in the right order, in the right sequence, standing up tall, then figuring out, you know, what's really happening. And that's why the legislative briefing, which is what we're going to talk about today, ranting up to the legislative briefing is the perfect way to approach it. Because there are rants going on, and maybe there need to be rants going on, and we have so many factors at play. So what is the legislative briefing? Well, it's a briefing in the Capitol Auditorium in the legislature, which the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum does every January, just before the opening of the legislature. This year, the legislature is opening on the 21st, a Wednesday, and in this case, the legislative briefing is on the Friday just before that, namely this Friday, January 16th, beginning at 1:30 and going to 3:45. And we'll have, oh my goodness, we'll have a lot of speakers. I think altogether we have 22 speakers, count them, and we're going to identify all the issues that, you know, that have happened and not happened. We'll try to put them all together and see where we really are. You know, and I have to say, I really like this approach. You know, we're going to ask all these guys the same questions, like where are we and what's holding it up or not, and what do we need to do now to move it ahead, and how does it play with all the other elements that are on the table. And then when we have had a number of speakers, and I can tick off some of them, we have Mark Glick from the Energy Office. We have Mina Morita. She's the chair of the Public Utilities Commission. We have Shasha Fesharaki, which is, I mean, it's really important speaker because this time he's going to talk about, well, oil. And oil has become pretty important at $50 a barrel. What kind of effect is that having? What kind of effect will it have? Is it going to suck all the oxygen out of our initiative? We're going to have Jim Flanagan talk about Hawaii efficiency, energy efficiency. We'll talk with Reen Kamita, who's from the Division of Consumer Advocacy at DCCA. I'm not sure if that changed. We talked to Dawn Lippert. She does energy entrepreneurs. Let's see, we're going to talk to Asia Yeri and talk about transportation. And we talked to the money chairs or members of the money committees, both houses of the legislature, to figure out how much money we have, you know, for clean energy these days. We talked to Chris Lee. He's the chair of the Energy Committee in the House. Mike Gabbard, he's the chair of the Energy Committee in the Senate. We talked to Mike Hamnett. He's the co-chair of the Energy Policy Forum. We're going to talk about the barrel tax. You know, all these issues that have either, you know, got stuck or maybe didn't. We're going to find out where they are. And my great hope on this is that it's all going to come together for us. And that's because we have the integration panel, of which you, Marco, are a member. Integration panel is Marco Mangelsdorf of Provision Solar, who speaks and writes and teaches about energy, and who makes regular commentaries in the Star Advertiser and various other publications. Jeff Michelino, who is certainly a clean energy man, dedicated to advancing and advocating for that with the Blue Planet Foundation. And I have Ben Sullivan, who is the energy coordinator for the county of Kauai, which has been actually very successful in adopting some clean energy programs. And Sophie Cook, she is a writer, the energy and environmental reporter for Honolulu Civil Beat, and she's very akamai about this. And that's the thing. We're going to have these four at the end of the program sort of take stock on everything that was said and try to integrate what it all means and give their thoughts. And they're actually commenters. We want them for their brains, and we want them to give comments on exactly what's going on if you put it all together and what the real message is and what message is that. That's the message to the legislature, because don't forget, this is the 2015 legislative briefing. We are going to try to educate the legislature about where we are these days, so they shouldn't do something, wrong, and they should do lots of things right, and get on board where we really, really are. And so this is a very interesting and exciting format to follow. And I'm so glad, Marco, that you're on the integration panel. I look to you for some 50,000 foot level thoughts, which you always have, in order to keep everybody on balance. What are your thoughts going into it?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm truly honored and privileged by your invitation to come and join this group later this week at the Capitol building, and I very much look forward to it, and hope that we can provide some not just 50,000 foot level advice, but also some very practical input to the legislature in any way we can as they deal with some very challenging and often controversial questions in terms of not just Hawaii's energy future, but also how things are going to be playing out in the near term, in the months to come, because of course our legislature meets only for less than a handful of months, from January to May, whereas other legislatures around the country are pretty much year-round. So there's a lot to do in a short amount of time that's going to have an impact not just years from now, but in the months to come. So I'm very pleased to be a part of that. And I have to share with you, as I've been watching you over the past few minutes, Jay, that the background on the screen there is imagery that causes me to think of the early 1980s classic Pink Floyd album called The Wall. And what the graphics that you're using, or have been using at least early on in the show, is very much metaphorical of a wall, and what it's going to take for us collectively to be able to break through that wall. The wall being continued dangerous and unhealthy and expensive dependence on imported fuels that come from a very, very long ways off for our transportation needs and our power generation needs. And this is a wall that we've been trying to, again, collectively chip away at for decades and decades. And yes, progress has been made, but still a heck of a lot more progress needs to be made, even despite the fact that oil closed on the world market today around $48 a barrel, which we haven't seen pricing like that in about 5 years. And apparently there's speculation that it could drop below 40 in the weeks or months to come. So it's just an incredibly fertile time, both from the perspective of conventional fuels, oil, natural gas, and of course renewable energy as well. And then throw in the possibility of the largest corporation in the state, Hawaiian Electric Industries, being purchased by Juneau Beach, Florida-based NextEra Energy. And gosh, it's almost, where do we start? What thread do we start to be able to find our way in kind of Ariadne fashion, an Ariadne thread to where we need to go, make it through the wall and through, if not to the promised land, at least to a better place.
Well, and I forgot to mention those when I did my exposition here. I mean, LNG, we expect Shasha Fesharakshi to talk about that, where that relates to, to oil. And of course, the deal, call it the deal. We want to hear from Alan Oshima, and we want to know what HECO has in mind, and of course what NextEra has in mind. But the outline is sort of vague yet. Here we are. It's only the beginning of January. It's only been a month since they announced the deal. It's only been a month since oil really got ridiculously low, and so these things are changing our landscape, whether we like it or not. And I submit to you, Marco, that there's enough foment on the traditional elements in the pie here to make one hesitate, wait for things to settle down before one goes ahead with big initiatives. It's like, should we really go into geothermal right now? Should we really spend a lot of money on wind? Should we really do LNG if oil's going cheaper? I mean, LNG pre-assumes that oil is going to stay expensive. Why do LNG if we still have all the infrastructure we need to do cheap oil? I mean, it just, I'm not saying it's going to stay that way, but certainly all these factors are dynamic. They're all going to change, maybe dramatically. Maybe oil is going to zip right up in the next 60 days. But for now, it gives you pause, doesn't it? It makes you want to wait, doesn't it?
Well, I think given the volatility of fossil fuel pricing these days, and like you mentioned, oil and natural gas, I think it's reasonable to conclude that famous maxim, whatever goes down will go up, whatever goes up will come down. And I think the smart bettors would be betting on the likelihood that over time, natural gas prices will go up as oil prices will go up. It may not happen in a month or 2 months or even 6 months, but in my opinion, low fossil fuel energy costs in 2015 should not be seen as a rationale or a reason to question or to put the brakes on the state's efforts to become more energy independent, which has been a goal of the state going back to at least the middle to late 1970s. So low energy costs in terms of fossil fuels are a blip. How long the blip is going to last, no one knows, but I see no reason why that would play a substantial factor in slowing down our commitment, our necessary commitment, and using the adequate resources to be able to accelerate our transition to a more energy independent state of Hawaii.
I wouldn't disagree with you on the basic policy point you make. However, when you throw in the fact that there's a transaction afoot here, that's going to change really a lot on the landscape, and that transaction is going to take an inordinately long period of time to approve. And in my view, I don't know why it wouldn't be approved. I mean, you hear some of the the naysayers coming up with objections to it, but they're really minor objections. The larger piece is this is a strong company that is very akamai about how you run energy in general and clean energy specifically. That could really help Hawaii in many ways with investments, for example, and with new and best practices and procedures to really take our initiative to another level, a better level. I don't know why anybody would, stand in the way of that, but hey, we'll see what happens. And this is, it's like the old First Hawaiian Bank ad, the bank that says yes, well, this is the state that says no. And we could have a big no in our hands, like Super Ferry, because we don't know how to manage foreign investment, even when it helps us. But anyway, so just to talk about that for a minute, why would you want to go ahead with initiatives when you don't know exactly when and whether this deal is going to close? But you do know that NextEra's policies will be different. And you do know also that in the interim, in the period of, regulatory approval, say a year, customarily, not a lot of things happen. I mean, if I was going to pay X dollars for a share of Hawaiian Electric, I don't want that to change. I don't want the valuation to change. I don't want the business model of Hawaiian Electric to change. I don't want anything to change because I already fixed my price. Now, I may want it to change for the better so that my deal gets better and that Hawaiian Electric is doing things that I will ultimately do, that I as the buyer will ultimately do. So there are a few exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, things are quiet in a period of waiting regulatory approval. And why would anybody take long leap, aggressive steps in this period? What in fact could be done in this period, even if you felt like doing that when everything awaits this big result. Okay, so I agree with your policy point about should, but I don't think it can or will. Do you agree with that?
Let me answer that by addressing or by bringing up a really excellent article I read in the current issue of Hawaii Business, and this was an excerpt from a book that my friend Robbie Alm has recently written on leadership.
The Faith of Leadership, yeah.
Yes.
I have to footnote that by saying that he rolled that book out at our ThinkTech 15th anniversary United reunion back on December 11th. And it was really, really fabulous because that book had not actually been in print until that very day. And it was that they rolled the first printed copies out that day. And then he spoke, he gave a speech. He's one of our directors, you know, Marco. He gave a speech about the book and about leadership in general. And it was really, really wonderful. So I'm glad you're reading it. Tell us what you're learning.
Well, he was, part of it was in excerpts there in the Hawaii Business Magazine of this month's issue. And I was reading it yesterday and really enjoyed, I think very highly of Robbie. I think he did a really fantastic job while he was working at Hawaiian Electric Company until his retirement. And what I found very interesting is his discussion of essentially a transition period in a bureaucracy, a transition period in a company when it is bought by another company or is merged but with another company, and the degree of anxiety and uncertainty that engenders amongst the employees of the company. And one particular phrase that I picked up on, which made an impression on me, which is something he called the tension of transition. And I thought in 3 words that really sums it up in terms of the anxiety, the tension, the uncertainty that so much of the rank and file, and probably even management, have when something like this goes down. And that, as you mentioned or alluded to, has a tendency to freeze people. And this is something, one of my first observations when I heard about this putative purchase back in early December is initiatives that were maybe considered or about to launch or had been launched recently, that there is the tendency to just kind of go cautious, go slow, don't make any mistakes as this quiet period is unfolding. And I think it almost couldn't come at a worse time in terms of there's more bold, bigger, bolder, important decisions that need to be made at Hawaiian Electric that may not necessarily be made or committed to in the months to come as the due diligence process is going forward and the PUC is doing its review and the Security Exchange Commission is doing its review and so forth. So I think it's just going to be a challenging time for...
No, I agree. I agree absolutely. And it takes, you know, your piece from the book, from Robbie's book, takes it a step further. I mean, I was saying that just as a matter of, you know, the customary result in a regulatory approval period, forgetting about the effect on executives, is that everybody waits to see what the buyer is going to want to do and doesn't want to take any remarkable steps in that period. It's a sort of calm before the storm sort of thing. But the other element is that you don't know whether the buyer is going to hold on to the same executives, and he may not. And it could be there's going to be all kinds of changes. We know that certain executives are going to get parachutes, and they're probably going to be out of there. If not immediately, then soon enough, maybe after a period of consulting. Other executives may stay, and that's a call that's made by the buyer. So during this period of regulatory approval, every executive is thinking to himself, gee, am I going to keep my job, or have to go out in the street and look for something else? And exactly how many utility companies are there around that I could get another job at? You know, it's a unique situation for most of them, and there may not be any jobs for them outside of Hawaiian Electric. So I think that's just another element that makes it quiet right now, waiting to see what happens. The other point is that we were in a period where the lines were coming together, where the PUC was demanding plans and actions, demanding, all kinds of new steps right now, and resolution of old problems right now. And there was, at least from that point of view, there was a need for immediate action from the utility. It's hard to imagine immediate action when you're in a regulatory approval process. And I think that even if we wanted to see that happen, and certainly the PUC did, and even if the public expected dramatic things to happen, it's not likely that they will be as dramatic in a period of regulatory approval. And speaking of periods of regulatory approval, I think we're going to take a break. We're going to take a quiet minute or so, Marco, to think about
I approve.
this. Okay, approved. Motion seconded, approved, and made. We're going to take a short break right now. You'll see.
Aloha, my name is Paul Jackson, better known as PJ, and my local interest is in sports. I have my own sports radio show at KWAI AM 1080 that you can stream live. I also have my own website, pjsportsradio.com. We have live guests in studio, and we talk about discussions and topics that everyone wants to know locally here on the islands. We cover everything from surfing to basketball to whatever's going on locally, sports-wise. We try to do our best and cover the topics in depth as much as we can. Once again, thank you for joining PJ here on Hawaii Sports Update. Mahalo.
Okay, hats off to our broadcast engineer, Zuri Bender, who makes this show better and better. Every day, better and better. Whoops. And one of the things that we have today is we have new templates working to make us look like we're in a big studio. So thank you very much, Zuri Bender, for that. Anyway, so I wanted to get your take on that, because it seems to me that that there is nothing really on the table right now that demands immediate action by the utility, and that things are probably going to focus on the regulatory approval. That's where everybody's attention is concentrated, and maybe this will make it fast. Maybe this will expedite that approval, and I think that would be a good thing, because then things will begin happening. What do you think?
Well, I would say to you, Jay, that there is something I think that needs and will continue to need immediate utility interest and approval and effort, and that is the ongoing efforts on the part of the solar electric industry in the state of Hawaii, which is employing not a small number of people, to move forward with HECO, HELCO, and MECO allowing more rooftop distributed generation in the form of photovoltaic systems, more rooftop DG, to be able to be installed in their service territories. And what I'm referring to specifically is that there are ongoing discussions between Hawaiian Electric engineers and the manufacturers of inverters, which are the devices that convert DC, direct current electricity, to alternating current electricity. And these inverters are key in all solar electric systems that are connected to the grid. And these discussions are extremely important to us in the industry, to inverter manufacturers, and ultimately to the consumer who wants to put a photovoltaic system on his or her own roof. And specifically, what I'm talking about are the settings, the parameters, the programming of these inverters that can and need to be changed by the manufacturers to do a couple things. Number one being to be able to provide more stability, essentially, for the grid writ large, to be able to handle, for all these thousands, tens of thousands of systems, to be able to handle grid anomalies and faults in the grid, so that Hawaiian Electric can have more confidence in these tens of thousands of PV systems, so it's not going to lead to some type of cascade failure in certain events. And second, to allow the Hawaiian Electric companies to accept additional PV generation in the form of rooftop DG. And this is a very, very big deal to us in the industry and to the hundreds of homeowners and growing by the day here on the neighbor islands, and to the several thousand and growing homeowners on Oahu who have been waiting sometimes patiently, sometimes not so patiently, for a considerable period of time to try to get their PV system approved so that they can install it and become more energy independent. So this is an area where any type of freezing of action or freezing or slowing down of momentum in terms of coming to agreements with the manufacturers to be able to move forward with these new settings would really be bad news for people like my business, business like mine, as well as many others, as well as folks who want to go PV.
Yeah, well, even at the time this deal was announced, we were 4,500 people waiting in the queue, and the solution was probably going to be something about smart grid, about these inverters and other equipment too. And when Alan Oshima took over October 1st, he said that he was going to try to resolve this within a period of months. I don't know the progress of that. Maybe you're in the industry, you know the progress of that, but I haven't heard much about the progress of it. And then, of course, then the deal was announced, which changes the landscape. So, I think what we have is one element among many elements, all of which are still somehow on the table. And the planning that would go into reaching a plan finally, because we don't have a plan. Remember, the IRP plan never got approved, and it's just out there lingering of no consequence. And so there's no other plan. And I think, again, well, there is another plan. That is the plan that Hawaiian Electric came up with at the insistence of the PUC last summer. But I'm not sure if that's actually in process now. And so anyway, what I'm saying, I think, is that we need to resolve a lot of things before we can resolve the PV thing. For example, it seems like NextEra is not into rooftop solar as much as utility, large capacity solar farms. And arguably that may be a better solution for the guy who cannot afford rooftop solar, or the guy in a condo that would really prefer that the utility handle the photovoltaic. And if that's where NextEra wants to go, we shouldn't make any assumptions to the contrary. It could be that what we need to do is let NextEra get into position, make its argument, make its plan, and present that. And it could be different than what Hawaiian Electric has been doing. On the other hand, as a buyer, very persuasive buyer, a very powerful, well-heeled buyer, it could speak through Hawaiian Electric and say, look, why don't you listen to us and take our lead on this, and why don't you adapt your plans to the way we think we would like to do it as and when we get approval. Right now, I think that's not really resolved, and right now, I don't think it's time for any big stuff to happen, and therefore, I don't think it's time for any little stuff to happen either. You need a larger landscape plan before you can solve these old little problems. Sorry, I don't mean to call PV a little problem, but it's only one of a number of problems that are all interrelated. All of this is interrelated, including, for example, the inter-island cable, which Hawaiian Electric said was not feasible, but which NextEra says could very well be feasible. That would change the paradigm. It would change the interaction of a multiplicity of these different elements that are on the table, depending on how you go. So, I think if one thing is in suspense, it's going to, by definition, suspend other related things.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment on the cable, Jay, and of course the underwater cable from either the Big Island to Maui to Molokai, Lanai, and then onto Oahu, or just from Molokai to Oahu, or just from Lanai to Molokai to Oahu, or from Lanai to Oahu, or from Maui directly to Oahu. I mean, there are so many permutations over the past years. My feeling is that when it really all comes down to whether it makes sense and is acceptable politically, that you would have a cable installed at a substantial cost where the lack of renewable energy resources on Oahu is being met by more renewable energy coming from utility-scale solar and or wind farms on other islands. That's really what it boils down to. And it's hard for me to make a case how that ultimately, when the decision is made to start spending the big bucks, will that be politically acceptable to legislators and regulators, that you would have a 200 or 400 megawatt wind farm on Lanai feeding power to Oahu, or a 200 megawatt wind farm on the beautiful west end of Molokai feeding power to Oahu, or a big wind farm on the island of Maui feeding power to Oahu. I just have a hard time seeing that ultimately being practical and politically feasible.
I certainly, it was trounced on Molokai, and it was likewise trounced on Lanai, and it's been, although it remains a possibility, I think we have to give credit for that. It could happen. Logically, legally, it could happen. It's all a function of public opinion. Public opinion is fickle, as we know. It could change. If I, call me the Fidell Power Company, if I came in and said, look, I'll pay for that. I'll pay all of it. You don't have to worry about any public money being involved. And furthermore, here's my prediction, or my promise, that I will deliver power to you cheaper with this system that I'm going to build. Because I have worked it out, and I know from my larger utility experience on the mainland how to do this. And there are undersea cables everywhere in the world now these days, and we can use that technology and make it work cheaper. And with large farms, the utility farms, PV farms rather, and this cable, we can make a statewide system that will deliver power at the same rate to all the islands. So those 50-cent rates, on Molokai, whatever, they're going to come way down. Just leave it to me, boys, and I won't cost any public money, and I won't, make it hard for any ratepayer. I'll just do it, and I'll give you the benefit of my expertise and my new technology. Now that could be what is going to come to pass here. And if that's the case, I think the undersea cable has a chance. I'm not saying the people on Molokai are ever going to agree to putting, a wind farm on the west side, or the same for Lanai in the Garden of the Gods. But, maybe some other arrangements, some other configuration of the cable between one island and other islands will be a more efficient distribution of power in the state. And to add one further thought before I turn the mic back over to you, Marco, is I've always felt that we should see this as a statewide system, even including Kauai. We should treat ourselves as a state of islands, not an island state. And we should be connected. We should be connected in every which way, by ferries, by all kinds of transportation possibilities, and certainly by power and telecom. And we've been drifting away from that, and strictly as a matter of the image of the state, the way the state works together. I would like to see more connectivity in more ways. So on that alone, I would take a look and try to make inter-island cable work. Now you got the mic.
I think I'm not going to argue with the in principle and in theory the argument you make in terms of being able to have a statewide grid, and in principle and in theory, there's some appeal to that in terms of levelizing the cost of electricity. But I just don't think ultimately when push comes to shove, I don't think, number one, that there's going to be some type of miraculous Daniel K. Inouye type of federal handout, and I don't mean that pejoratively at all, but of course, Senator Inouye was recognized by many for years and years and years as being a mover and shaker in Washington in terms of bringing federal dollars to the state of Hawaii. And God bless Brian Schatz and Mazie Hirono. I think very highly both of them, but they're still incredibly junior compared to Dan Inouye. And I think the likelihood of federal money paying for this is probably very, very small to essentially non-existent. So then where's the money going to come from? It's going to be substantial. And ultimately, the question is this in the public interest? And I don't think ultimately that the answer will be affirmative to that question.
Well, that's an interesting question you raise, and I had a conversation with Henry Curtis on that very point a few days ago. He says, well, the acquisition may not be in the public interest as well, but what does the acquisition mean? Are you labeling the acquisition by one plan or another? You can only talk about the parties when you talk about the acquisition. And if you, Henry, and Life of the Land are unhappy with the way Hawaiian Electric has operated over the past few years for one reason or another, then what makes you think you'd be more or less unhappy with its successor? You may be more happy. So, to me, the public interest it's a relative term, is what I told him. But let me ask you one more question, then we'll close, and that is, how do you think your panel is going to function on this? Have you thought about your panel? That is you, Marco, and Jeff Michelina from Blue Planet Foundation, Ben Sullivan, Energy Coordinator for Kauai, Sophie Cook, Civil Beat reporter in environment and energy. How is it going to work? Because, you guys are really thinkers, and you come up out of the box, and do you have any sense of how that's going to go?
Oh, that's an excellent question, Jay, and I would respond by saying, first off, that it's going to depend on what we hear. It's going to depend on what we hear during the previous hours from the other speakers and the other participants in terms of trying to integrate that and make sense of it in some type of comprehensive or coherent framework. I can say for myself that I'm probably going to be perhaps one of the more hard-nosed out of the four in terms of what the present and the near future holds, and what the legislature should be aware of or should consider doing or not doing in the next 4 or 5 months. Jeff Michelina, who I think very highly of, is probably more of a visionary than I am, looking not 6 to 12 months down the road, but looking at what can and should be in a longer time frame. Sophie is an excellent reporter, been covering energy for a number of years now with the Civil Beat. I think Sophie her ear is very much to the ground in terms of what's going on a day-to-day level. And Ben, I'm less clear about what Ben will bring to the table. He's been obviously involved in Kauai energy issues and politics for years and years, and will be able to, I'm sure, provide a very important perspective.
And we haven't even factored in the PUC and the reappointment of Hermina Morita or someone else as the chair. We haven't even talked about that in this show, which means there'll be lots of surprises for us, and lots of new issues and elements and interrelationships to discuss on Friday at the legislative briefing in the state capitol auditorium at 1:30. I hope you all come down, anyone listening, and you can hear Marco Mangelsdorf, and I'll be moderating, and I'm looking forward. Thank you so much, Marco. Looking forward.
Fantastic, Jay. I look forward to seeing you in just a few days. Aloha.
Aloha. parking lot, which is if you
Yeah,
draw,
you were